Have you ever felt like you were invisible? As if all the stories you've lived, all the battles you've faced, and all the scars you carry simply don't matter to the world around you? The hospital door slowly opens, revealing a man with grey hair, a weathered face, and a crumpled folder clutched to his chest. He walks slowly but with dignity. His tired eyes seem to hold secrets that few could bear. He's not there for himself. He does not seek medicine, help, or comfort for himself. He came for someone who isn't even his blood, but who he calls his brother. A brother forged amid the fire of battles, in the cold nights and distant trenches, in the silent moments when one held the other's life at the tip of his fingers. This brother's son is now trapped between life and death, breathing on life support in the emergency ward of that same hospital. A young life cut short by a brutal accident. But today, in this place of healing, the man who once walked through minefields to save lives is completely ignored. Nurses rush past him, faces closed, eyes cold, no one even noticing their presence there. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt the painful weight of social invisibility? Every step you take down the hallway feels heavier, as if you're walking through quicksand. The veteran approaches the counter and tries to speak to the receptionist. His voice is low, tired, almost shy. "I'm here for my friend's son. He had an accident." The response he receives is a blank, indifferent look. "You need family identification, sir." He holds the crumpled folder, full of documents and memorabilia, trying to explain that he has everything they need right there, but no one wants to listen. His voice is drowned out by the ringing phone, by the employees' chatter about trivial matters. He is invisible again. The humiliation hurts more than any battle wound. Soldiers are trained to withstand physical pain, but no one prepares them to face silent contempt, cold indifference, social abandonment. This man, who dedicated his best years protecting strangers, is now treated as if he were nobody, as if he were unworthy of attention or respect. What you discover now may surprise you, because this story is not just about an ignored veteran, but about how our society treats those who gave everything for it. Every second sitting in that empty waiting room turns into an eternity. He clutches the folder even tighter to his chest, the only link with the past, with a time when his presence meant hope, protection, and security. Now, he realizes that everything has changed. It is no longer gunshots, bombs, or enemies that threaten your dignity, but the subtle and silent contempt of those who should be there to help. A security guard approaches, rigid, with suspicious eyes, suggesting that he leave the place so as not to get in the way. The veteran lowers his head slowly, without arguing, his heart squeezed by a pain that no one there could understand. And when he turns to leave, his briefcase slides and falls to the floor, scattering papers with marks from the past, valuable documents, and a signature that could change everything. But no one notices. Nobody bends down to help. As he collects the documents alone, his heart heavy, a detail goes unnoticed by the distracted employees. At the top of the main page, a signature in black ink bears a name that few would dare ignore. A name that tells stories of heroism, honor, and bravery. And if someone in that place had stopped to look, perhaps they would have realized who that apparently simple, invisible, and humiliated gentleman really was. Stay with me until the end. Because what is about to happen will reveal a truth capable of transforming contempt into admiration, indifference into recognition, and suffering into absolute triumph. And that's something you simply can't miss. The veteran's shaking hands struggle to collect the papers scattered on the cold floor of the hospital entrance. Each leaf he picks up seems to weigh a ton, not because of its content, but because of what it represents. Memories of a lifetime dedicated to protecting, serving, obeying. Medals, recognition, records of missions that were never told on television. There on the sidewalk, he crouches with difficulty. People rush by, dodging as if he were just another old man lost in time. Nobody asks if everything is okay. Nobody offers help. A drop runs down his face and mixes with the dust on the floor. Maybe it's sweat, maybe not. He discreetly wipes it off with the back of his hand, trying to preserve what little dignity he still feels at that moment. The pain in his legs, which he has carried for years since the war, seems to scream louder than ever now. But he doesn't complain. Never complained. Because he learned at a young age that those who lived through hell don't beg for heaven, just out of respect. If this type of situation touches you in some way, if you have already witnessed something similar, or felt the weight of indifference on your own, I would really like to hear your story. Write here in the comments what has touched you most so far. Serious. Sometimes, a simple story from you can open other people's eyes and transform the way we see those who live next to us in silence. Your participation here, in addition to strengthening this community that values honor and empathy, helps keep this message alive and reaching more and more hearts. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, stories of those who gave everything for us and are still forgotten, leave a like. This shows that you care and helps the video reach those who need to hear this truth. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is not just a click. It is a commitment to memory, to justice, to the respect that so many heroes like this still hope to receive. And it is with you that this mission continues. One video at a time. One story at a time. There, sitting on the concrete bench, the veteran hugs his briefcase tighter, as if his only link with the world was stored inside. He doesn't know it yet, but something is about to change. One decision, one look, one moment of true attention, and everything can change. The hospital corridors seem to have no end. The strong smell of disinfectant, mixed with the constant cold of the air conditioning, created an almost hostile environment. Not for everyone, of course, but for those who didn't fit in with the rush of professionals in lab coats. He remained standing, still with the briefcase in his arms, leaning against the wall as if trying not to get in the way. Like someone who has learned over time to occupy as little space as possible so as to be ignored in peace. Nurses hurried past him, eyes glued to clipboards, lab coats flapping, as if they had more urgency than humanity. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. With each step, he seemed to dim a little more, like a candle burning alone in a dark room. When he tried to approach the counter and explain the reason for his presence, he barely managed to finish the first sentence. "Do you have a family badge?" said a voice without patience, without emotion. He pointed to the documents, the folder he had carried so carefully since leaving home. But the receptionist didn't even look away from the screen, as if the weight of what was inside didn't matter at all. There were military reports, letters, instructions, mission records, documents that proved he wasn't there out of curiosity or whim, but out of duty, out of loyalty. But no one wanted to see it. A security guard appeared from the corner of the room. Tall, young, with the look of someone who still believes that strength lies in the physical. He arrived with a stiff posture, one hand close to his belt, as if preparing to contain a threat. The eyes swept the veteran's body, as if evaluating a problem to be removed. "Is something wrong?" he asked firmly, without hiding his alert tone. The old man slowly raised his eyes, taking his time. There was no arrogance in the look. There was pain. The kind that doesn't scream, but weighs like lead in the chest. "My name is William. I'm here because my brother's son is inside. He was in an accident, and He trailed off, swallowing hard. "I just wanted to know how he is." The security guard didn't even blink. "You need to wait outside if you don't have a badge. We can't leave anyone without valid identification." The sentence came as a verdict. No chance of defense, no regard for history or emotional urgency. William nodded slowly and took a few steps back. The sound of his worn boots echoed louder than any siren. He walked away from the counter, leaning against the wall again. The body seemed bowed not only by age, but by the weight of accumulated humiliation. He remembered when he crossed entire forests in the rain, with the gun on his back and the hope of returning alive. From when he ran with his shoulders on fire to save fallen comrades. Now, in that icy reception, he was just another lonely old man disrupting the order of things. The pain did not come from refusal. It came from the form, from the coldness, from the complete lack of recognition. He didn't expect special treatment, never waited, but there, all he found was indifference. And perhaps that is worse than any overt offense. Indifference smells like forgetfulness, and oblivion is the cemetery of those who are still alive. A doctor walked past him and looked at him briefly. Their eyes met for a second, 1 second, but it was enough for William to know that he had also judged him, perhaps as someone who came to ask for medicine without consultation, or as another insistent visitor who wanted to break protocol. Nothing about his clothes said who he was. No medal on his chest, no decoration on his cap. He was just another old man. Only he knew what was in his briefcase. And only he understood what it meant to be there. And yet, he stayed. Because he knew that if he left, he would be abandoning the young man inside who was fighting for his life. And he had already sworn an oath years ago on a distant warfield. No one is left behind, not even in times of peace. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what's behind these cold gestures, these automatic reactions, and this lack of empathy is something much bigger. It's about mindset. It's about decisions. It's about the way we choose to see or ignore each other. Comment there. I see you. 3 simple words, but they change everything when said from the heart. The digital clock on the wall read 3:42 in the afternoon when the silence around him was interrupted by firm footsteps. A new employee, still young, perhaps recently hired, approached with the air of someone following orders, but with no room for empathy in his eyes. He stopped in front of the veteran like someone staring at a forgotten object in the wrong place. "You can't stay here," he said, in a voice too polite to hide his disinterest. William looked up calmly, as if he already knew what he was going to hear, but still needed to confirm it. "I'm waiting to hear from a boy, a friend of mine's son. He's here, hospitalized after an accident on the highway." The young man just shook his head, cutting off the attempt at conversation, as if he were giving an indisputable verdict. "This is only for registered family members. If you don't have authorization, you'll need to wait outside." There was a moment of silence between the two, an instant in which the world seemed to slow down. William took a deep breath. He didn't insist. He didn't fight. He just grabbed his briefcase more firmly and began to stand up, with some difficulty, feeling every bone scream in protest. The joints looked like old iron, but the spirit, that was still that of a soldier. Each movement was like a cruel reminder that time had passed, and that, with it, the reverence for all he stood for had also disappeared. He took 2 steps towards the glass door when his foot hit the step. The folder slipped from his hand. It was as if time stopped for an instant. Papers flew like leaves in the wind, sliding across the hospital's polished white floor, scattering pieces of a story that no one wanted to read. Official documents, letters from soldiers, signed reports, and at the very top, in clear letters, the signature that still carried the weight of a name that should make anyone stop: General George T. Walker. But no one stopped. Nobody ducked. Nobody looked. The papers became part of the landscape, like trash carried by a non-existent breeze. The young employee just sighed and motioned for the security guard to accompany him to the exit. William knelt down with effort to collect each page, each piece of his story, as if he were putting together the fragments of his own value. No one realized how much it hurt, not physically, but in the soul. Outside, the heat punished the concrete, but the cold he felt came from inside. It was the same cold he had felt when, at 22, he lost his first friend in combat. It was the cold of seeing the sacrifice forgotten, of realizing that, to the world, he was now just another old man. Nothing more. Nothing more. But what hurt most wasn't the contempt. It was knowing that the boy, his brother in arms' son, was in there. And maybe he didn't have much time. And that he, William, even though he had crossed war zones, survived ambushes, faced death head-on so many times, was now blocked by cold bureaucracies and looks that judged by appearance and not by history. As he collected the last of the papers, his fingers touched a yellowed envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter. It belonged to his battalion mate. The last letter before dying. If something happens to me, go to him, please. Protect my son, like you once protected me. William closed his eyes for a moment. That was his mission, and he wouldn't give up on her. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because behind this story, there are revelations that say a lot about how we see each other, about the impact of our decisions, about the behind the scenes of a society that prefers to ignore the hidden truth of silent suffering. Sometimes you don't need to shout to prove that someone carries greatness. Sometimes you just need to look closer. Write it in the comments. I would have reached down to help. Because if you feel this, even in silence, you are already part of this journey. The sun slipped across the horizon, as if it too was tired of everything. The golden light did not bring comfort at that time of day. It only revealed more clearly how cruel the world could be to those who had already given everything. William slowly sat down on the worn concrete bench outside the hospital. The hunched back wasn't just a result of age, but the burden of being ignored in a place where there should be compassion. He adjusted the folder on his lap, as if protecting something valuable in a world that no longer sees value in anything that is not in the system. A piece of paper, attached to the gate railing by a persistent thread of wind, swayed as if trying to remember. Something fell. Something was forgotten. But no one noticed. Nobody looked. Cars passed by. People went about their routines. Inside, machines flickered next to a bed where a young man was breathing with difficulty, fighting for his life. Outside, the one who promised his father that he would be there if something happened was treated as a nuisance. An intruder, a foreign body outside of protocol. He passed his hand over his face, feeling the heat of his own sweat mixed with the dust of the city. His entire body hurt. But the pain that weighed most was that of having become invisible. It wasn't the first time. The feeling had been repeating itself for years. Ever since you hung your uniform in your closet and started wearing regular clothes, as if the world only recognized your value while you were on duty. After that, you're just another one. People think the war ends when the soldier returns home. But it's not quite like that. The real battle begins when you realize that no one remembers what you did, that no one cares, that you were trained to protect a country that, in peace, prefers to forget the faces of those who fought for it. William knew this. That's why he never asked for recognition. But being treated as if it didn't exist, that was an open, exposed wound, without a bandage that would heal. He leaned back on the bench and looked up at the sky, trying to find strength where there wasn't much left. The mind wandered through memories, as if each memory was a temporary shelter to endure that moment. He thought about the first time he faced crossfire, in the boy who screamed for help between the explosions. In the arms, he used to carry him to safety, and how, that night, he swore he would never leave anyone behind, not even in times of peace. Time passed slowly on that sidewalk. A father passed by pushing his baby stroller. A young woman left the hospital crying, with exams in her hand. But no one noticed him. No one even asked if he needed anything. People look outside and forget that the inside can sometimes be cruel too. The walls of a hospital hold more than diagnoses. They hide mentalities, decisions, revelations about what we actually value. And what this scene shows, a man who saved 126 lives being treated as if he didn't matter at all, is a dangerous reflection of what we fail to see. It's about the silent backstage of society, about the coldness of protocols above humanity, about the impact of ignoring others because of a badge, an outfit, or the silence with which they present themselves. The folder was still on his lap, now with the papers carefully rearranged. He ran his fingers over the time-worn cover. There were marks on it, of dust, of war, of the road. Marks that no one there would know how to decipher, but that counted for more than any ID card. And even in the face of all this, William didn't think about leaving, because the mission was still ongoing, and he always knew that some missions are lonely, but no less important. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we experience in this type of situation reveals a lot about how appearance still determines the way we treat people, and perhaps If we were more willing to see beyond what our eyes show, we would discover heroes where today we only see forgotten old men. Comment there. I wouldn't leave him alone. Because deep down, what hurts someone like William the most isn't the pain in their body. It's the silence of those who could have reached out and chose to walk right past. The sound of a stretcher's wheels echoed through the main entrance as the sun's rays were already slanting through the hospital's glass windows, dyeing everything a melancholy orange. The movement slowed down, the steps became more spaced out, and the night shift began to prepare to take over. William was still there, motionless on the same hard bench, like a statue that time had forgotten. There was no drama in his gestures. There was resignation. A type of silence that only those who have borne the weight of the world can maintain. And it was at that moment, between the end and the beginning of a shift, that it appeared. Young man, tired look, hair tied up in a hurried manner, backpack slung over his shoulder. She was already leaving. She passed through the gates like everyone else, with her gaze focused on her cell phone, until something made her stop. She saw the man there, and unlike the others, she not only looked, she saw. His posture, the way he hugged that briefcase to his chest, as if he were holding something more precious than gold. The face was marked, but without bitterness. The eyes are sunken, but still alive. It was as if he was waiting for the world to remember he existed. And for some reason that she herself couldn't explain, she felt that she couldn't just follow her path. She took a step, then another, until you stop in front of him. William looked up slowly, without surprise, as if he had already expected the approach to be just another polite refusal. But she didn't say anything. He just stood there, with an honest hesitation in his eyes. And that's when he held out the folder. He didn't say anything. It just extended. She picked it up carefully, feeling the real weight of the object, and the symbolic weight of everything it carried. He opened it slowly, as if he were about to leaf through a forgotten story. And right on the first page, his eyes stopped. The signature. She knew that name. Not personally, but from college, from books, from lectures that veterans sometimes gave during tribute weeks. General George T. Walker. But it wasn't just a name, it was the content. The confidential reports, the decorations, the printed coat of arms. What she held in her hands was something that shouldn't be outside of a military archive. And there it was, on the lap of a man sitting in the dark, outside a hospital that had just treated him like a nuisance. Her throat went dry. The penny dropped like a silent avalanche. She looked at him again, this time with different eyes. He wasn't just a gentleman. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a hero. One of those who don't need statues because they carry their own history on their skin, in their gestures, in the dignity of those who don't demand respect, but who deserve it without asking. "Sir," she murmured, swallowing the emotion. "Since when have you been waiting here?" The voice was low, almost trembling. He responded with just a look. I didn't need to say anything more. And at that moment, everything she knew about empathy, about vocation, about humanity seemed to reorganize inside. The revelation he had was not just about him. It was about what she herself was becoming if she walked straight past someone like that. She closed the folder carefully, holding it tightly. "I'll sort it out," he said. And for the first time that day, William saw someone move past him without obligation, without protocol, without looking the other way. She ran back inside the hospital. And what happened next would change the atmosphere of that place completely. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this moment was not just the turning point of a story. It is a mirror of how small decisions, a look, a choice, an extra step, can have a silent but devastating impact. Behind the scenes of this scene shows that there is a hidden truth that almost no one wants to admit. There is no lack of empathy in the world. What it lacks is the courage to act when it calls. Comment there. I would have stopped too. Because sometimes what defines who we are is precisely what we do when no one is looking. The hospital door opened with a dry click, as if the building itself was ashamed of what had just happened. The young nurse crossed the reception with hurried and breathless steps, holding the folder with both hands as if she carried a life in her fingertips. His eyes scanned the room in search of someone, anyone who had the authority to correct the injustice he had just witnessed. When he saw a senior doctor, he ran to her, his breath ragged with indignation. "You need to see this," he said, opening the folder right there on the counter. The doctor, accustomed to tragedies and endless shifts, began leafing through the papers with disinterest until her gaze fell on the signature. And then it stopped. An awkward silence settled in. The kind of silence that only happens when the truth invades a space where lies have already taken hold. The folder was closed in a hurry. The doctor turned around and called for the supervisor urgently. An older nurse, who had ignored William hours before, now watched the movement with sweaty hands. The name that circulated among them was not just any name. He was a living legend. And suddenly, the old man at the bank was no longer invisible. Now everyone knew they had made a mistake too big to simply ignore. The hospital radio crackled with interference as orders began to be fired. "Call the director. Call security. Where's the driver?" The rush began. It was no longer the normal flow of a hospital. It was the beginning of a desperate attempt to fix what had been done. The same place where there was silence before now overflowed with anxious voices, distressed looks, people trying to reorganize the scenario of a moral tragedy. A black car arrived at the entrance. Not a taxi, not an ambulance, but a vehicle of honor, one of those reserved for authorities. The driver got out, opened the door, and waited. And then, finally, William was invited in. The invitation did not come with words. It came with gestures, with looks that avoided meeting his, with heads bowed in shame, with careful steps of someone who now understood that they were facing someone who deserved not only attention, but reverence. He rose slowly, with the same silent dignity with which he had borne all the humiliations of the day. There was no anger in his eyes, just tiredness. A tiredness that comes from years of battles, not only with weapons, but with indifference, with forgetfulness, with the coldness of a world that only cares when someone points the finger. When William walked through the glass doors of the hospital, there was no soundtrack, no clapping, no speeches. But there was something more powerful than all that. The silence of the guilty, the discomfort in the eyes of those who once judged him, the sudden stiffness of the backs of those who ignored him. Because now everyone knew. They knew they failed, and they knew even more that he didn't need to make a fuss to prove anything. He was the scandal they tried to hide. The director personally came to meet him, shook his hand tightly, and promised to resolve everything. But William didn't respond. He just nodded, accepting the gesture, but without forgetting what had been done. He didn't need the promise. I just needed them to do right. The entire hospital felt different at that moment. The air was heavier, as if the walls had also been confronted with the truth. The hidden truth that no one wanted to see. That even heroes can be forgotten if there is no one willing to remember. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment says a lot about who we are as a society, about the mentality we cultivate, about the repercussions of our decisions in the face of other people's pain. Sometimes all it takes is a name to make the world move. But is that what defines someone's worth? Does the absence of titles justify contempt? Or are we losing, day after day, the ability to recognize greatness in silence? Write it in the comments. Now they see. Because when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't scream. She just looks you in the eye, and everyone understands. The room was small, stuffy, with the white light from the ceiling flickering uncomfortably. The sound of the monitors filled the silence with slow, almost sad beeps. William entered with slow steps, each one heavy with memory, with tiredness, with unseen pain. The boy was there, lying there, his face covered in scratches, tubes connected to his fragile body that struggled to stay. There were no words in that environment, and if there were, perhaps they wouldn't be enough. He approached the bed as if stepping on sacred ground. The life-hardened eyes were now teary, but firm. He sat next to the bed and held the boy's hand with the delicacy of a father who has buried more friends than he should. The palm was small, cold, without strength. William wrapped both hands around her, closing his eyes for a moment. And then he murmured words that no one else would understand. They were not common phrases. They were codes. Phrases said between soldiers, between combat brothers. Things that only those who were on the verge of death know how to say with so much weight and so much love. The nurse who had brought him there remained at the door. He didn't dare interrupt. Her eyes were watering, but she didn't move. Because there was something in that room that couldn't be explained. It was as if, for a few minutes, time had stopped. The entire hospital seemed distant, stuffy. Nothing mattered more than that silent, almost sacred scene. Here was a man who had been forgotten by the system, humiliated by bureaucracies, ignored by hasty glances, but who had not failed to fulfill his mission. A man who did not seek justice with screams, but with presence. That did not demand recognition with words, but with loyalty. The truth is that a hero doesn't need to scream, because true greatness doesn't make noise. She just is. She imposes herself with the calm of someone who knows what she's worth. And William knew. The next morning, the city woke up to an image that was spinning too fast to ignore. It was a photo, taken discreetly by a hospital employee. In it, the old veteran was seen at the bedside, holding the hand of the unconscious young man, with his gaze fixed on his face. Nothing more. No fancy captions. Just 4 words. Silent hero. Ignored by many. Respected by those who matter. The post went viral before breakfast. First in local groups, then in military honor pages, until crossing borders. The press tried to find William, but he did not want to give interviews. He just said that his mission wasn't over yet. As long as the boy wasn't out of danger, he wouldn't get out of there. I would sleep on the bench if I had to. And if they asked why, he would answer with the same simplicity with which he always lived. Because I promised. The story was being told by people who didn't know him, but who now seemed to know him more than many people close to him. Because deep down, that scene rescued a forgotten truth. You never know who is next to you until it's too late. You never know how many battles someone faced before crossing your path. And you never know how much your coldness or kindness can impact the journey of someone who just needed to be seen. The hospital, which previously did not have time to listen, now organized tributes. The same people who sent him away in the early afternoon now called him sir with low voices and downcast eyes. The receptionist who had denied him access cried silently when she saw him again. But William held no grudges. He just kept silence. The kind of silence that teaches more than speeches. The kind of silence that transforms mentalities. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this story doesn't end with applause or headlines. It continues where many others begin. At the moment, we choose to see others with empathy, or ignore them with disregard. This is the behind the scenes that no one teaches in books. It is the hidden truth that defines our humanity. And perhaps, if we paid more attention to whoever was sitting next to us, we would learn more about courage, respect, and greatness than in any formal class. Comment there. I would have listened to his silence, because sometimes what is not said is what screams the most inside us. If you've come this far, it's because you felt something. Maybe he remembered someone. Maybe he saw something in himself. Or maybe he just felt that this story needed to be heard to the end. And that already says a lot about you. If this type of content makes sense to you, if these stories really touch you and make you think about what really matters, subscribe to the channel here. This shows me that it's worth continuing to bring stories like this, which go beyond the surface and help to rescue what we can't let die. Respect, empathy, and the memory of those who lived for something bigger than themselves. Also leave a comment with the phrase, "I wouldn't have turned my face away," just so I know that you came to the end with me on this journey. Because yes, it was a journey. And you stayed. Oh, and if this video moved you, leave a like. Not out of obligation, but because it creates a bridge between us. Help this story reach those who also need to hear it. And there's a video here that complements this topic in a way that I know you'll want to see. Click and stay with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.